Listen to what, there's a halakha that I wanted to show you from the Code of Jewish Law, and I wanted to show you his comment over here because it's really, really interesting. Okay? The halakha is this. The halakha is written about sorcery and magic and what's permitted and what's not permitted. So it says, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law says, if you're bitten by a scorpion, if you get a scorpion bite, you're allowed to, there's a specific incantation called the lachash that would say, like certain words from verses or certain things, whatever it was, they would say certain words that was like an antidote, reported to be an antidote to the scorpion bite. Okay. Now, you're allowed to say it, and even on Shabbat, because, right, you're allowed to say it, and even though that, now listen to what he writes in the Shulchan Aruch, even though it helps nothing, listen to what he writes. The Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law says, you can say these funny words, it helps nothing, it's garbage, right? It's funny words. Even though it helps nothing, seeing as though the person is in danger, they permitted him to say it because otherwise the person will go meshugah. You see, what's he saying? He's saying that in their days, they thought that such a thing could help. They had this kind of superstition called it. So now you've got a person who's it's in danger of his life. You should let him say it. Why should you let him say it? Not because it means anything, it's really nonsense. But the reason you let him say it is because you want to keep him calm. You need to keep the patient calm. It's important to keep the patient calm. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Where does the Shulchan Aruch get this from? So the Barak, the ancestor, says he gets it from the Talmud, the first statement. But the second statement, he gets from the Rambam, Maimonides. You see, the Talmud doesn't say that even though it's nonsense, you can use it. The Talmud just says it as a remedy. Maimonides says it's nonsense. Says the Gaon of Vilna. Listen to what this. The Gaon says, this is the Gaon's note. Now, usually the Gaon's notes are much shorter. If he wrote this note, he wanted to make, believe me, this is one of the longest notes I've seen on the Gaon and Shulchan Aruch. So if he wrote this note, he wrote it for a reason. But I wanted to contrast his approach to that of Maimonides, which we discussed a couple of weeks ago. Listen to what he says. He says, the Rambam writes in the Perish HaMishnah of Barak. This is what the Rambam writes, that it's really nonsense. The Rambam writes it's nonsense, it has no effect, but we should do it to calm him down. But then he says, but all the authorities disagree with Maimonides. And then he says, over here, let's see if I can read it. Yeah, and then he says, because, and then he quotes from the Gemara, and then he says it from the Gemara, and then he says, "V'hu nimshach achar philosophia." What does that mean? What does he say about Maimonides? He says Maimonides, you know what made him err in his explanation of the Talmud? Is because Maimonides was a philosopher. He was a rationalist. Right? He was like an Aristotelian thinker in many ways. He was a rationalist. So therefore he says Maimonides made a mistake in interpreting the Talmud because he was a rationalist. And then he says over here, he says over here, and then he says it's, then he says, but many people have already hit the Rambam on his head for this. Yeah. Let me just stand over here so I can read it a bit better. And then he says, quotes over here, and then he says over here, now, okay, now, here he says, philosophy made him go off the path, and to explain the Gemara in a way of, to say the Gemara is not literal, and he says it's wrong. He says everything that says in the Talmud is literal, and it has a literal meaning. The literal meaning is true. One should accept the literal meaning, but it also has a deeper meaning. So yes, there's a literal meaning and there's a deeper meaning, and so therefore he rejects. You see, the Rambam didn't believe in sorcery and magic and all this kind of stuff. The Rambam didn't believe in it. He said it's nonsense. That's what the Rambam said. The Vilna Gaon said, no, you can't do that to the Talmud, and he says not true, and therefore the Rambam explained it in different ways. But I wanted to just show you this comment of the Vilna Gaon. Now, Hasidim et Miknagdim, the last topic for the night, and one of perhaps the most interesting topics, and I'm going to end here. Now, the Baal Shem Tov, life overlapped a little bit with the Vilna Gaon. He was born in 1700, and I believe he passed away in 1760. So their lives did overlap. The Baal Shem Tov is considered the founder of the Hasidic movement. He had a student called the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich had a student. The Maggid of Mezrich's student, the name was Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi wrote a work called the Tanya. You heard of the Tanya? Chabad Hasidim Lubavitch, they learned Tanya. They considered Rabbi Shneir Zalman, who was a student of the Baal Shem, they consider him to be their founder, their founding rabbi, their first kind of rabbi. Now, he wrote the work called that. Now, the Vilna Gaon went against the Hasidic movement very, very strongly. The Hasidic movement, he was dead against it. He wrote letters against it. The funny thing is, and no one quite can understand it, the Maggid of Mezrich sent Rav Shneir Zalman of Liadi, together with one other person, to the Vilna Gaon to try and see if they could have an audience with the Vilna Gaon to sort out the dispute. The Vilna Gaon would not see them. No one knows why. Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, we mentioned him, he said he had a tradition from the house of Brisk. He had a tradition that the reason is that the Vilna Gaon knew that if he would spend time with the holy Shneir Zalman of Liadi, then he wouldn't have any dispute with him anymore, and he'd bring him over to his side. I can't understand that but anyway, that's what some say. Others say that he felt that some of the beliefs that were written in the Tanya were heretical. For example, the Tanya speaks about how God exists even in, it's called panentheism, I think, that God exists even in inanimate objects. I think we call it in English panentheism. But basically the idea is that God's existence is even in inanimate objects, and the Vilna Gaon apparently opposed that. He wrote letters and he considered it kind of like heresy, it seems, but it's not so simple exactly. But the bottom line is the dispute remained for many, many years. And sometimes it was ugly. The dispute was ugly. Today, it's not simple to understand exactly what went on there. But for me and you, what is our approach? Our approach is Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chaim. What does that mean? These and these are the words of the living God. We cannot understand the dispute of these great people. They're disputing certain statements in Kabbalistic texts. And this is not for me and you. We consider today, and certainly after the Holocaust, Rav Rosh Ber Soloveitchik, he attended the birthday of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He went there. He celebrated with him. Today, the Hasidic world and the Miknagdish world, they've come together a lot. I want to tell you a fascinating story. And this story is recorded in a book. This book is called Makor Barak. There was a great genius by the name of Rabbi Zrachia Halevi. Rabbi Zrachia Halevi, he was a rabbi in a town in Russia, and later he became the Av Beit Din of a place called Novardok. He became the Av Beit Din. He wrote a halachic work, which is one of the classic works called the Aruch HaShulchan. Not the Shulchan Aruch, the Aruch HaShulchan. Now he had a son who visited America. His son's name was Rabbi Baruch Epstein. He wrote a work called the Torah Tmima, which is actually, interestingly enough, it's similar. Richard asked me about the Barak. It's similar to the Barak except on the Chumash. What it does is it takes every verse in the Chumash and it shows where the sages commentate on that verse of the Chumash. It's called the Torah Tmima. Now he wrote a history book in the early 20th century. In about 1905, he was in Russia. They were starving. He didn't have power to learn Torah, so he says he wrote the history book because he didn't have the strength to learn, and he wanted to write about the previous generations. So he writes the following incident there. His father, the Aruch HaShulchan, when he was a rabbi in Russia, became connected with another rabbi in Russia who was the rabbi in a place called Lubavitch. And what was that rabbi's name? His name was, we call him the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek